So those are all plugged in. Check that.
Oh, you know, I just didn't. Did you make sure you didn't have any crumbs from dinner? I didn't check.
Yeah, there's recording.
There's really no problem, you know, other than the big wine.
Chengiah, close your eyes.
The wine stain.
The wise what?
Nice wine stain.
Actually, I am going to brush your sweater off right here.
Okay.
Just there's a couple little. And then over here, you got a couple little pieces of white thread or something. There we go.
It's kind of cool.
Team's getting, everyone on the team gets one song. You want to be on the team? No.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Dark jacket, everything light
Lisa,
shows
while
up.
you're over there, when you turn the knob up on the dimmer,
Clockwise or, well, like that?
I wanted to make it brighter. Do you make it brighter?
I'm turning the knob. Which way do I turn the knob? This way?
Test. Okay, that makes that's the light over there that you're dimming.
Oh, okay.
So I want it bright.
That's as bright as it goes.
So, all right, now dim it. Turn it all the way up.
It's this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turn it all the way off.
It all the way off.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right back on. Turn it back on. All right, leave it on. Turn it back on. It brings a nice warm glow.
Remind me of the two leading psychologists.
You're talking about Freud and
Jung. Yeah, okay.
Is that the GoPro? I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Kevin. Okay.
Good. Go to. Go forward. All right. I'm going to start the cameras and crack a slate.
My audio is already going, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Chengiah Ragaven, roll 1, scene 1, take 1.
Okay.
You're good.
What thoughts does the American flag bring to mind?
Well, the American flag brings to mind immediately the physical aspect of the flag itself, the colors. But the subliminal images are the power, a feeling of identification, and slowly it is a complete synthesis of usness or ourness, we. So it's more than simply a flag. It is psychologically our entire country, our existence. So the symbolism of the flag is not only the flag, it conjures up all kinds of images, and we understand it. We who are part of the 1% understand that this symbol has a tremendous effect on the general population. It has a tremendous impact on people across the world. All they have to see is an American flag to understand the power of America. So it's a symbol of power. And it's very useful. I mean, the military uses it, the countries use it, the games use it in some ways, in various ways. So the flag is the symbol of power in various forms in different parts of the country itself. And in terms of international use, of course, you'll find that wherever we are, our embassies and our cars, all of them carry these symbols. It's, again, the symbol of us being a powerful nation. We've built up that symbol within that flag. So the flag is not just simply a piece of cloth, but as I said, it is the country. It's the spirit of the country. So, and it has tremendous psychological impact on the viewers. It has a tremendous psychological impact on the people themselves, who will do literally anything in defense of the flag. It's the defense of the country. It's defense of the ideology. It's a defense of the people's aspiration. So when we talk about the American flag, I think we must be able to understand that this is a symbolic representation of the country, symbolic representation of our, we're slowly building ourselves to be an empire. It's a symbolic representation of the empire of the United States of America. And as such, other nations either look upon it with fear and with respect, and or else, if we are totally opposed to the policies of the United States, then we'll look upon it as the symbol of the enemy. So anything that has the American flag is seen to be something that is against people that fear that the flag is rearing its head, and it's the enemy. So the flag is not the flag only. The flag has many, many symbols, and we must be able to understand that, to understand our position in the world.
Do you want him to look more at the camera? Do you want me to move closer?
I want him to look at you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure. Describe the psychology of control.
The psychology of control has the psychology itself has a long history, and the long history is where we have it's both a social science and a science too, and in terms of its scientific application, like all other social sciences, we have subjected it to serious criticism and experimentation. And in the psychology, I think, like all other schools, have been subjected to a serious investigation as to how this is applied, how it is, firstly, to understand humanity, because each one of us carries in a particular entity of this psychology, and we all are psychologists to a great extent. But the control has been a mechanism of scholars, scientists, fundamentalists of kind, people who certainly are not engaged in the open discourse of human understanding, but rather the control of that understanding. So we get a whole lot of scientists spending, and the country spending millions of dollars, as indeed the the Soviet Union, for an example, but worse still, the Nazi regime. The Nazi regime spent considerable amount of energy in terms of how to use propaganda as a mechanism, and then this is a particular type of psychology which influences the people. It has nationalism, it has a feeling of power, it is a feeling of morality and ethics, which are all manufactured in Chomsky's terms. So the psychology usually is geared in such in framing of them and us being the good, because initially that is essential that we project that, and we find that it is it then penetrates into the various different sectors of human society. In other words, the psychology is then applied in international relations, at the United Nations and all of the international institutions. Then it's applied or restructured in the finance and industry, so that it is possible to convince and enable people to see that having a lot of money and wealth, you can live a qualitatively better life. And then you use this. I think it is Skinner who used this experiment earlier on to look at rats in a maze and how the tremendous malfunctioning took place and how to control them. And that experiment, I suspect, in psychology proved very useful, and all other experiments to control crowd, and how the military and others of power, usually used by the institutions of power, and certainly they are governments, together with other agencies, to take this control in the interest of a people who want to profit and benefit as a group. So you'll find that in most societies, this is an agency within the state. Now, there's an argument here that the system, which certainly is an entire international structure, that the system is over the years, certain nations have created and added to the system, and it might be argued that we have at the moment a westernized system where all nations, and this is the state, the governments, are controlled in some direct and indirect way of manipulating the state, and the state in turn manipulating the governments, the institutions throughout, and all these institutions are victims of a control by the system, by the state, to the institutions, local government, and all the institutions below. So in other words, we do have, it is true, that most nations are controlled. And sometimes these controls are argued as a moral basis. I, as a professor in sociology, political science, ethics, human rights, town planning, moral philosophy, I have not been convinced that modern societies have any intention of not using 99% of the people in the interest of the 1%. I've examined it very succinctly to see what of this will enable people as a whole throughout humanity to enjoy the gifts of life. But it is not true. Now, also psychology has become fundamentalized. That is well argued by Dr. Jean Chenoda Bolen, who has written The Tao of Psychology. She argues, and psychology has followed very much the thesis of Descartes, that is, rationality is built with the mind and body and doesn't consider the soul, the spirit, what we call conscience or the consciousness. That has been eliminated in the psychology of modern societies, that unless the Easterners have used it successfully, unless we include that the Tao of psychology is both Eastern and Western psychology. Now, this is not something new, because Jung and Freud, and particularly when Jung began to realize that more and more, I think this was a conflict between Freud and Jung. Jung decided to begin to look at psychology in a more profound way than the rest of the psychologists earlier on. And I think Chinota Bolen was very much using Freudian psychology and particularly Jungian psychology in this analysis, so that we are not controlled, that we take control of ourselves in the exercise.
Are the motivations for control the same today as they were, say, 500 or 2,000 years ago?
I think today, we don't want to make comparisons here, but we've built up institutions for that control. I mean, I think with imperialism and colonialism, and also together with that, and not much work has been done, that the control of women and racial groups and the weaker people are profound. And I think it's a great profit-maximizing phenomenon to use as much people as possible to accumulate wealth. So we have what is called 1%, nearly owning 90% of the world's wealth. So the question really is, we've built up institutions of power. The military is one of those institutions which percolates our society. The police force is another institution that we have given tremendous amount of arbitrary power. And then the legal fraternity, which is now taken on, and we're second to military because they have a tremendous opportunity to manufacture as many legal and sub-legal texts, which then is used to control the people and control the system as a whole. And of course, we have schools where brainwash the students who come regularly so that they can fit into the categories that we want them. And so the university, of course, is now an archetype of training schools and no longer critical thought. And the exciting discovery of knowledge and wisdom, which our forefathers did have, is any longer present in the universities across the world. So, in other words, we are finding that the more modern we become, the more progress we've made. We have made progress in a kind of neo-fascism and kind of control. It seems that one would have thought that we were educating our humanity, and when there are almost 7 billion people, 6 billion living below the breadline, 3 billion earning less than $2 a day, then you argue, given the tremendous creation of wealth and the amount of wealth there is in the world itself, how is it possible by sheer logic of justice that so many people are starving? So many women are starving. So many children are starving. What kind of humanity is this? When the rationality ought to have been more one of generosity, because we are much more civilized, as we argue, with the advent of time. So, no, I don't think. I think there's an African philosopher called Diop, Cheikh Diop, who said, is civilization or barbarism? And I think when we begin to look at the First and Second World War, where the greatest violation of human rights have taken place, there were millions who were killed. And since the First and Second World War, I think there has been systematic genocides going throughout the world. And if we are arguing, or if there is an argument that we've become more civilized, the nations are becoming much more open in a way of our psychology to humanity, then the figures, on the other hand, that millions are dying of starvation, people are dying of all kinds of illness and diseases, and these are being controlled by multinational companies, then I suspect there is something very desperately wrong in the state of Denmark, as Hamlet would say, in the state of the world, and particularly in the United States, who is supposed to be the harbinger of freedom. I mean, this is the tragedy. Our country really is not the harbinger of freedom. We in some part of the world, are considered to be an absolute criminal in our philosophy, in our political ideology, in wanting to conquer the world and creating all kinds of dubious institutions, which is set up by the CIA and other institutions, which are creating terrorist groups and aiding and abetting them. And there's a clear example of what happened in Libya and elsewhere. There's evidence throughout that there has been infiltration of all kinds of groups that are, that are not groups that have come out of the country itself, but rather created and organized elsewhere. So, are we improving? And the answer is no. As a matter of fact, it might be argued that we are becoming worse.
What are the consequences of non-resistance to control? And you might almost take it into, well, the second question relates, why do human beings subjugate themselves to control?
Well, we can't help. The controls are subliminal. In other words, we do not see it very clearly. It is also used. Of course, remember the first control came from the clerical institution. That is the church, the temple, the mosque, you name the religious belief systems. They have been number one in terms of making us subservient to either creating this institution, let alone the Spirit of God or Spirit of Christ or Spirit of Muhammad or whatever it is. I mean, that's one thing. But when the church took over, or the institutions of religion, they've suddenly found that this was minting money. So no religious groups, there may be some exception, it is money. And when you understand that it is, and people are so eager, given the brutality of the industrial system, they want to find some kind of salvation. So they want to go along and get some salvation on a Sunday, that there is a God somewhere, and that God is a kind and generous God. And they go to these places, and of course they are milked further on. So what we are suggesting here is that there's the control that comes along, which becomes almost pathological. I mean, you have a guilt feeling if you challenge the precepts of the temple or the synagogue or the church, or whatever it is. You can't go against this thing because you're going against God. I mean, that's That's what was told to us, not you're going against a whole group of charlatans who are pretending that they are representing the supreme power. And then, of course, there's the education. I mean, you are educated from the very inception by a system that reinforces authority, that reinforces the fact that you've got to follow this, and it's the right thing to do. If you want to live in a society, you've got to accept the norms and values of that society, and the norms of the values of the society are usually constructed by the theological institutions, plus the state institutions, which work in collaboration. The state helps theologians help the state, and the state helps the lawyers help the state, and then of course all of them help each other. And so there's a confluence here of a power structure that really represses you continuously until you have pathologically accepted the fact that if you're not being controlled by these institutions, there is something wrong with you. The state of nature, it may be argued by philosophers, is not what is normal. You shouldn't be living in the state of nature. I mean, if you're looking at the indigenous people of the world, and then you say, well, these are barbarians. I mean, they are eating, they want to cure themselves. They're having these roots. And they grind the roots, and they cure themselves. Well, you go there and you say, well, look, man, you know what? These roots, you're grinding them, it's bad. That's not the way to go about it. Give me those roots, I'll take them and make them into pills. And I'll sell them to you at 10 times the price. You're going to pay for these things. So what we've done is we've taken nature, brutalized the components, brutalized the rationality, and brutalized the construction to make money. And so ultimately, you are controlled in almost all aspects of your life. And some of us accept that because it gives us privilege and power and money and status. So this structure has a lot of attraction to it. And this is the attraction of the 1%. I mean, these are psychopaths. And all of us have become some small psychopaths in our respective jobs. We are a sick humanity. There are some wonderful people, of course there are. The average person, I think, down the street is a wonderful person. But we are what Chomsky calls manufactured people. We are manufactured individuals. We are not ourselves. We try and be very much individuals with a pathology and psychology and love and care and humanity. It's there. As a matter of fact, you can see it with our grandparents and their parents, but you see very little with the progress of humanity. So do we have civilization or barbarism? I would argue that we are in the stage of barbarism. We must recognize that. And therefore, if we want the state of civilization, which is possible, or we may go the way the Greeks went, there was civilization in the past that just disappeared from the world, and I think the modern civilization is going to go the same way, and I actually hope so in my own way, because you know what, it's a wonderful world, but when I see the gatekeepers, those who are in power, I have. It makes somebody who's conscious of this world, this beautiful world, very sad. Yeah.
How have you personally experienced control in your life?
Well, I was born in South Africa in the heydays of apartheid, and so there were 200 legislations that controlled, apart from all the other legislations of the state, there was 200 specific legislations that controlled the lives of people who are not white. And so you know where you stay, where you get a job, where you go to school, what area you live in, how much you earn, what kind of schools you go to, if there are any schools at all, what kind of hospitals you have, if there are any hospitals at all. If the government wanted it to land overnight, it passes legislations, some kind of rule, and you are off, bundled with your whatever little you have and thrown into some vacant land where you've got to survive or sink. And so there's been a phenomenal control of almost every day of one's life. Then there is a huge police force that comes along and operates with impunity. I mean, in other words, there's nothing you can do to challenge the police. They come with almost a feeling of they could do whatever they do. And there's no possibility of recourse. Because if they came and kicked your door, if they felt that you somehow violated the rules or challenged the apartheid system, they came and kicked your doors and dragged you out in the middle of the night. Your children can be crying. But not only in South Africa, I did my research on Latin America, particularly Chile, Argentina, and Brazil during the time of the dictatorships. And one of the interviews was an Argentinian woman who said she was put into a cell next to her husband, and and she could hear the torturing of their husband. And she said the two things really made her life unbearable. One is when they dragged her and her husband to prison, the children began crying and what have you not, and she had to leave the children behind, not knowing what's going to happen to the kids. And she in the cell, and she could hear the husband being tortured on the other end, and she had to bear with all of this. So fascism, Nazism, all the isms today, in the world around, I see those isms being reformulated and passed off as democracies. I don't want to mention some countries where if you're of a different color, if you belong to a different ethnic group, or if you belong to a different religious group, where you are brutalized in your own country, where there is Nazism existing and referred to as freedom.
You're talking about a redefining of their terms. They redefine freedom in order to make a tyranny.
Yes. And somewhere, I think George Orwell said that would happen. I mean, I think in Animal Farm and in 1864, 1948, 1984. He looks at how the party is taken. And I suspect, when I begin to think, I don't think there's been any other philosophers.
All right. Hold on 1 second, Chengiah.
Yeah.
I was going to take it off the hook, but we didn't think it would call this late.
It's a Sunday night. Okay, so what you're talking about is Orwell. He calls it newspeak.
Yeah.
Orwell's job, or Eric. Let's see.
Hello.
Sorry, Winston Smith's
Hey.
job in 1984.
No, that's okay. No. Listen, we're in the middle of a shoot right now, and can we call you back?
Liberty is they redefine our terms. They call.
No, it's okay.
They call slavery.
No, all right. Well, I'll say bye.
They call freedom, terrorism.
Yeah.
Should I take it off right now?
So when she comes back, just in case.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job.
Yeah, good.
Sorry, my son.
Okay, it's off the hook now. I
Well.
apologize for that. I should have just taken it off anyway.
The redefinition of freedom from where to create.
Well, you said that. Do you want him to say that? Oh, okay.
Well, he understands what I'm talking about, so
Okay.
you can say it in his own words. You guys ready?
Okay. Do you want me to ask a question? Or did you want
I'll
to?
carry on.
How do
Okay.
tyrants redefine our words to create tyranny, or anything to that topic?
Yes, I think the extremely convenient way is for the 1%, the tyrants or whatever you call them, would take on words and give it a meaning. But I kind of always talks about double speak. I mean, you think you are hearing the same word, but the meanings are very different. As a matter of fact, they're just the opposite. And so when the leadership today speaks of freedom, it's just the opposite of freedom. And you must be able to understand that this doublespeak is taking place. And I don't think we are ready for that kind of thing to happen. I mean, in other words, we are still literally people, when we say that politicians comes along and he says, well, I'm going to absolutely make sure that you have all the facilities that are available. We tend to believe that particular thing, not understanding that this politician belongs to a particular crowd of double speakers. So, so what are we saying here? We're saying that the vocabulary remains the same, but the meaning is altered by a certain power structure. In some sense, this has been historically true. I mean, when dictators came and invaded countries, they always argued that they came there with a good intention. No dictator walked in and said, well, look, I'm going to take over this country and bring you chaos and so on. But the intention always was to absolutely make sure that this is an extension of the empire, and therefore the empire is going to be. So how do we understand? And the question for the average person in the street, Joe the plumber, is going to say, do we understand what is being told by the media, particularly the news media and the television media and all of the other medias, which are being used by the system to initiate and perpetuate this kind of doublespeak to society? So society is certainly a very unstable position psychologically. They feel that freedom has come. And South Africa is a classic example. When you really look at that society, it is more unfree now than ever before. They have a kind of freedom to move and make money and everything else and do all that kind of stuff when a great mass of them are suffering from a system that is horribly pretending there's a democracy when there is no democracy for the average person in the street because he's starving, or she doesn't have a place to sleep, the children are also suffering with diseases, and all these things are happening at a tremendous rate. But we are democratic. The same thing with the United States. When I hear the story about democratic United States, it makes me laugh because, first of all, the only democratic entity in this country was the Six Nation Iroquois. It was they who were the most democratic people, democratic government. And my friend John Stuart Mills, worked for the Dutch East India Company, looked at their political system, wrote his idea about democracy, and then the spread of democracy in the world as if that system came out of John Stuart Mill. It actually came out of the Six Nations Iroquois. They were the most democratic people. Our American systems and our Constitution has embodied that democracy. But when you begin to look at the millions of people in this country without health care, without shelter, without education, you ask yourself, what kind of democracy is this? Is this not doublespeak? Is not this the fraudulence which we are, as an empire, are spreading around the world? We're using our muscle. For example, we were in Iraq. We destroyed a country which had a very good health system, a very good educational system. The Babylonian Empire was thriving as an empire when we were barbarians. That has been destroyed. Other parts of the world are being destroyed by civilization. And that's the irony. And if we don't recognize that this is what is happening to our society and the world at large, then we are perpetuating that system. I mean, when professors, lawyers, doctors, businessmen go along and say to other parts of the world that we are bringing democracy, this nation, of course, we're bringing democracy, we're forcing democracy down your throat. We've got some money, we dangle it. I've seen this in South Africa. You dangle the money and you come along and advise. We've got advisors going along everywhere in the country, advising what? That you become another Western nation and destroying the fiber and the cultural basis of that nation. It's a crime against humanity.
Do you think we answered that?
That in relation to that?
9 and 11?
No,
Or
10
10?
to 11.
Okay. So the question is, will you describe the caste system? And the question is, what can you tell us about the British East India Company?
Remind the caste system. Well, the caste system is very much what the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants practiced in this country. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestants had set up a caste system that Italians, Scandinavians, Irish, Mediterranean Europeans could not be white. They're not white. The white is, you've got to be a Protestant, and you had to be, mainly from Europe, and you can then join the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So the caste system really is that form of political system that we had in this country. But indeed, in India also, they had a caste system where it was believed that through a long history that there are certain people who were divided into 4 divisions: those who were engaged in academic or spiritual activities, those who were merchant class, there was a warrior class, and then there was the working class, the Shudras. I studied this for a while and said, from a political science point of view, and the science, it is totally unjust to have these class systems. I mean, it's not on. Then it was seen the difference between Western caste system and Indian caste system. The Indian system has, or structure, had a thing called dharma. Dharma means you have to consider the other as God or goddess. So when an Indian puts his hand together and prays to you, or to her, he prays you as God or goddess. So you could belong to the caste, you have to do the job, But you can't ill-treat anyone there because of the philosophy of reincarnation. If you treat the Shurda, the working class, or whatever it is, if you treat them ill, you must make the biggest mess, because in your next life you may be born as a low caste or whatever it is, and you'll have to pay for it because you have done something that was wrong. And you will be born again. There's no question about that within the framework. So, as a modern person, do I accept that? I don't. But I have very limited idea of the whole philosophy. Maybe it was okay. Also, when I read Plato wrote a whole thesis, and he had the four castes to work on his political theory too. And then I said, did Plato copy the class or caste system from India? Now, I haven't gone further on that to understand that. But the caste system in North America, among the wasps not accepting the other whites as whites, makes it very problematic for me also as to why this whiteness was sacrosanct and somehow there. So, tell me the question again.
What can you tell us about the British East India Company?
A British East India Company, like all other trading companies, the Hudson Bay Company is another example in Alaska, and also they really set up an institution which was the forerunner of imperialism moving in and taking over the country. In other words, wherever these companies were, they took charge of the trade with the respective countries, and also the monopoly of the trade. In other words, the Dutch East India Company and the Hudson Bay Company and so on. I mean, when you look, for example, at the Hudson Bay Company dealing particularly with furs, sending out these people to kill the bears and so on, and paying them peanuts for it, and the furs going back to Russia with a phenomenal profit. Well, the Dutch East India Company did the same thing with the spice trade, particularly in India and Malaysia and Burma and all of these things. Very interested in the commodities from the East, which was really luxury goods here. But sooner or later, you'd find that the spice industry and almost all the other industries from Southeast Asia really became part of the way of life in the Western world. So they amassed a tremendous amount of power, and then subsequently were the harbingers of imperialism. In other words, they made sure that they influenced, for example, I'm giving you which is slightly different, in places like El Salvador and elsewhere, the Dole Banana Company, which was very significant in El Salvador, one of the Latin American companies, very soon made sure that the CIA and the FBI and so on and penetrate that country and then overthrow the government and put up their own government. So that and the Dutch East India Company did nothing less. It made sure that the British enter, particularly India, and India's wealth was phenomenal with gold and diamonds and silver and so on. As a matter of fact, the British government still owes the Nizam of Hyderabad $2 million, I think, or £2 million. And from the history, from the history I know, that much of Indian wealth for the time that the British were there was taken by the British to England. So England's wealth, and certainly its central banking system and so on, was also provided us with all the wealth, because it was they who were the shipping magnates and the railroad owners who came along to this country and provided the infrastructure of industry here. So, and from that sense, you can say that the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company, all of these companies were certainly the forerunners of imperializing these different parts of the world, including India and elsewhere, and really very useful to building up the Western capital system. And in doing so, and us not recognizing it, we don't want to hear about it. I mean, as far as we are concerned, the wealth that we generated was generated from our country itself. And in this country also, when you look at the amount of wealth that was generated by the native Indian people and their lands, particularly gold and elsewhere, it's phenomenal, but unrecognized, because part of imperialism and control has been to say that we have been responsible for accumulation of this wealth to build our infrastructure.
Chengiah Ragaven, roll 1, scene 2.
Would you like me to start with the Boer Wars or the Freemasonry?
What were the Boer Wars?
Can you talk about the Boer Wars?
The Boer Wars were an extension to the various European powers. I think it was agreed at some stage, I think it was at the Berlin Conference, to divide Africa amongst the ruling powers of Europe, that is, the Germany, France, Brussels, Belgians, and various other groups of people who had vested interest in African imperialism and colonialism. In the meantime, the Boers had arrived in South Africa in 1562 and settled in the Cape. And then they moved on to Orange Free State and Johannesburg, and the British had arrived and settled in Natal province, and they arrived there. And Natal, I think, is the word in Portuguese for Christmas Day, and they arrived there and labeled it. And so, as the years progressed, the battle between the Afrikaners and the English for territories began to take place, but much of these wars also, I mean, the areas, the allocation was dependent on the fighting that took place between the colonial powers. I mean, in other words, if the Dutch lost the war, and then they ceded some territory in some province around the world, which they have certainly took part in, and made this a territory in either Malaysia or Africa or Latin America, whatever it is. So both of the battle for each one of these provinces, of the 4 provinces in South Africa, was waged between the expansion of the British on the one hand and the expansion of the Dutch on the other hand. And of course, as they began to invade the country as a whole, there were certain African regimes, like the Zulus, began to either side with the British or the Afrikaners. The same happened in the United States, where the native indigenous people here began to side with the British or the French. Louisiana, I think, is a case of experience here. So the Anglo-Boer War was really a battle between the English and the Dutch, and I think that basically the British were successful in trying to overcome the Dutch, and then at some stage put them into concentration camps. I mean, like the concentration camps in Nazi Germany and elsewhere. But what we do find in all these processes that much of the planning of winning and losing was very akin to the ideas that were speculating over in different parts of the colonial empire. For example, putting these Afrikaners, and particularly in concentration camps, was an idea that didn't start in South Africa itself, but these concentration camps were a European design. Certainly, I think if anyone else perfected this was the Nazis, but the Nazis, it wasn't a new idea. These ideas were copied around. So the Anglo-Boer War took place where the British and the Dutch fought, and the British won the Anglo-Boer War and then took possession of the entire South Africa. And this happened in the late 1800s, because by 1900s, the Boers lost the war, put in the concentration camps, and then participating in the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910. And then the Afrikaners had their political parties and the British there, and by and large, the British controlled the political system in South Africa. So, but then in 1948, for the first time, the Dutch won the elections in the Afrikaan. But here, I think one needs to very clearly state that the apartheid system didn't start with the Afrikaners as the world would want to know it. The oppression of the blacks and putting them into reservations was done much earlier by the British. Racism, classism, sexism, and all that comes with it was started by the British. And all what the Dutch did was to formalize it. In other words, it was de facto racism earlier on, and de jure racism and de facto later on by virtue of the Afrikaners coming into power and the apartheid state. But very, very conveniently, the British have in general propaganda have called it the apartheid system, which really put the entire blame, or have been putting the blame on the Dutch for their system of racism in South Africa, when in fact the British were the arch racist, and it was long before the Dutch ever got into power at all. So that was by and large, and then the battle that took place, and of course it was an unequal battle with the British certainly having the support of England and all the other parts of the world, and the Dutch, by this time the Afrikaners there had not, although they were linked with Holland, but they were not supported, military-wise by Holland or any other means. So they lost the war. And that war, in a way, is still going on. I mean, there isn't a kind of unity amongst the Dutch, although now there is a kind of patching up, as it were.
Do you want me to go on to Cecil Rhodes, or do you want to ask the Freemasonry question? Okay. Who is Cecil Rhodes?
Who is Cecil Rhodes not? Well, Cecil Rhodes was your epitome of a WASP. He arrived in South Africa with the others who aspiring politician and businessman and what have you not. He was very astute. He had gone to Oxford, and with that he came to South Africa and had two great aspirations. One, he wanted to unite the entire, not unite, control the whole of Africa under British rule. I mean, that was his singular aim. And secondly, he provided scholarship in Oxford for what is called the Rhodes Scholars, so that they were only Anglo-Saxon white men. I mean, that was the criteria. No women, no blacks, no anything else. So a very special scholarship for select men. But he was a great speculator. He had a friend called Milner. Milner was also a speculator. And within a short period of time, they owned much of the gold and diamond industry in South Africa and various other power structure also. So Cecil John Rhodes was the imperialist who perhaps injected British imperialism with the notion that the whole of Africa must become British and under the control of British. But I mean, that was part. He was an imperialist himself, and of course Britain had the idea long before Cecil John Rhodes, but he reinforced the idea and certainly was working towards establishing Africa as an appendage to British imperialism. Apart from that, I think he was a forerunner to Anglo-American, so that other minerals in South Africa, and South Africa is one of the richest mineral potential anywhere in the world. All of this became part of the British silver bronze heritage, and the Anglo-American group subsequently, which then controlled other resources in the country. And to some extent, they still own the monopoly both in South Africa and Rhodesia, because the mines extended to the northern part of Zimbabwe now. So that was Cecil John Rhodes in short. I mean, he's a legend, but a notorious legend, ruthless, forceful, very powerful politically, and was a great asset to the British in expanding their empire.
Oh, okay. Who is Jan Smuts?
Jan Smuts, again, was one of these politicians, belonged to the United Party, very influential South African, went to Oxford, came back, and one of the few Englishmen who joined the Afrikaners. Very instrumental in helping, I think, Herzog when the decision was being made to whether with the British in determining giving Israel, giving Palestine to the Israelis. Jan Smuts played a very important role there. But otherwise, he was an Englishman and was the prime minister of the country. Now, I don't think that, although he's very significant as the prime minister, there isn't anything particularly that I'm excited about the individual. He supported the United Party and kept the country in the hands of the British imperialists.
What can you tell us about All Souls College?
All Souls College, most colleges you apply to, and you are accepted in the college or you're rejected. All Souls College will invite you to become a fellow. In other words, if you are a known intellectual in the world, they will invite you to become a fellow of the All Souls. So in the intellectual and academic world, that perhaps is the highest award that can be given to any intellectual. They put you through a rigorous, when they invite you, a rigorous test. You've got to dine with the fellows. Now, if you think that's a joke, try eating at a high table in Oxford when there's half a dozen wine glasses and half a dozen port glasses and 10 forks and 20 knives and all kinds of gadgets. And so All Souls, when they invite you to become a member, they'll invite you to come and have dinner. And it's a kind of retirement for life. I mean, you do research and publish, and you give the odd lectures in Oxford, which means it's the university lecture. Each college, you have people giving lectures there, your tutors and so on. But we never got any lectures. We didn't have to go to lectures. We just went to tutorials. I mean, there was lectures. Sometimes you went to a lecture here and there, but university lectures are there going on all the time. And you can go if you want to, you don't go if you don't want to. I mean, there's nothing there. So these also fellows usually give a lecture or two, and they've got to give some lectures. But otherwise, it's a great privilege for Oxford to have you, and you have a great privilege of being members of the All Souls. And did I go to All Souls at any time to have dinner? I can't think so. But I've been familiar with it, and I've known people who have gone to All Souls, and it's a club that it's so attractive and yet so sinister, because Oxford trains the world's leaders wherever you are. And Clinton was there. It gives you a tremendous amount of confidence. And I must say, when I, as a peasant from Isipingo, went to Oxford, when I came out of there, I mean, I had this confidence. I don't care anybody. I mean, before that, I mean, I was a peasant from a little village. I mean, I went to the University of London and so on, but it didn't give me the strength that I went to Oxford. I came out there. After I came out of Cambridge, it was a different story too. So, I mean, I couldn't talk to Tom in those days, if I was still living from there, and, this eminent jurist from New York or whatever it is, how can I chat with him? But today we have, you could cut that off though, but. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Do you have one more question?
No, that was the last one on this.
That's why I think you said Jewish instead of Jewish. And I go, no, that was a criticism. Sure.
I'll just ask a question.
Yeah.
Chengiah, is there any influence on the world government, the world stage, by secret societies, something like Freemasonry, for example, in British colonialization? How does it play in world events?
Of course, the move towards having a one world government has been always on the agenda. And I suspect that the next stage from the United States imperialist position used to establish this one stage government, one world government. Now, I think there's no. I think there's a stage before that, and the stage before that is globalization. Globalization is imperialism in its modernized form. You go along, you penetrate almost every other country's resources, politics, and so on. And you can find that today, for example, in Africa, most of its leaders are puppets to imperialism. Latin America is posing a problem. I mean, today I'm not sure if Chavez has won the elections. I haven't heard the results yet. But Latin America has gone through the tremendous position of dictatorships and so on, but it's emerged and it's coming along, and I don't think we could move Latin America as easily as we moved Africa or controlled Africa. Then we have the Arab world. Well, the Arab world, our engagement in Syria at the moment is ensuring that the Arab world doesn't go the way we don't want it to go. So our engagement there, but it's volatile. I mean, we got Saudi Arabia on our sides and we got Israel on our side. We need a few more nations to be on our sides, but there's no easy answer there with Iran and Syria on one end. Southeast Asia, yes, we've got most of the countries under control, with the exception of Pakistan, which we thought we had under control, but I think there's a problem there now. Recently, I was advising a student in Burma. The junta is now, sort of somewhat liberalized but that's Myanmar really. But the Muslims there, particularly with the help of Bangladeshis, they are seeming to revolt against the junta, and so there's a disquiet there. And of course, Thailand and Malaysia and so on, somewhat less radical Muslim societies and otherwise. So, what do we have here? We have a pacified Soviet Union. Soviet Union leaders, the leaders of the communist parties, are now belonging to the world mafia. They're gangsters. So is almost the other enclaves around Soviet Union. Bulgaria is run by a group of and all the other, Romania and so on. Most of the party guys have become big capitalists. So it seems to our mind that what seemed at once upon a time was radicalized is now kind of, so the move towards this one world government is a possibility, and with horrendous consequences. And I don't think that if this world is going to be a happy world, that opposing forces now more than ever before must prevent this from happening. And I think this is why we who are progressives, I don't say being on the left or right, I don't even believe that anymore, but those people who are humanitarians are now must engaged in a full-scale, not a war, I don't want to use that word, but full-scale opposition to the war industry, to this one form of government.
I think that is now. Do you think we answered that one?
That's that one. That's the last question.
This one? 18? What is the... Oh. That's peculiar. What is the most peculiar thing that you noticed about Oxford's culture?
Man, you are made to feel you are the chosen.
Mm.
No way as a community, and you come there, you so easily get, no matter where you came from, but most of the people who have come there come from the elites. India, Pakistan, South Africa, whatever it is. They're the elites and they come there. There are exceptions. There are very few, I must say, and once you come out of there, you get a good job earning, tens of thousands of dollars and what have you not. I've been a part-time professor with earning $10,000 a year, if I got all the courses. No guarantee. And that's my life's work. I chose that because I believe much of my work has been spent in political work of one kind or another, agitation, marches, protests, organizing, and so on. And I want to live a simple peasant's life. I ride my bicycle, I walk, or Tom gives me a lift. I want to live this life simply because I don't want to be drawn into a bourgeois living. Because if I am, then I will lose my intensity. I will lose. If you came to South Africa now, you'll find that most of my friends are the guys who are cleaning, washing cars, working. We are every day sitting down and having a chat, and they want me to lead them, doing various things, and I understand their conditions. So, Oxford gives you the kind of feeling you've arrived. I mean, really, you don't have to go anywhere. Most of the judges and most of the qualified people around the world are Oxford, Cambridge, and of course Harvard people and Yale and so on come up there and get their. It's a finishing school. So intellectually, it's a very powerful institution, like the World Bank, IMF, in economics. And you take full advantage of it because you can go out in the world, and as soon as you know this, and I'm just the opposite. I mean, when my tutor said to me, why did you come to Oxford? I said, I come here to study the mind of my enemy. Oh, she said, have another glass of sherry. And that's exactly why I was there, to find out how this place, controlled the British Empire, and of course the American Empire subsequently, because those guys have come here. I have no qualms. What I appreciate at Oxford is it's given me the strength, as my son says, to kick asses, and which I did. So, and I think all people, if they've got a little bit of power and so on, should do the same thing. I mean, this is truth. This is spirituality. This is politics. You use that which you've gotten and that power, and there's a lot of power there. I mean, I've gone around to conferences and so on. Don't tell them that I'm, what my background is, but if that is useful and I think it's necessary, I put it out there, not because I'm proud to have gone to these institutions, no. And I've gone to McGill and London and Sussex, other good universities, but all of that with one intention, and the intention is to serve my people being, humanity, whether it's feminism or...
Yeah. How many years has it been since you became a political prisoner? And was it worth it?
Oh yes. I'm not sure what directed me. I come from a peasant family. My grandfather's worked on the sugarcane plantation. My father was a cook in a factory worker and so on. So I have no credentials whatsoever. And I think what drove me, of course, was I had an uncle who's a school teacher, and he was ruthless. He treated us very badly, and I think I was very sensitive to his ill treatment of my sister and I. And so I grew up with a little bit of anger, and I went to school, and when I realized there was political action going on and lectures and so on, and so as soon as I went to university, it just seems automatic that being part-time student, going at nights and whatnot, that the student politics were generating, and I joined them then. That was in the late 50s. So since then, I haven't turned back. Continued, as I said, the Latin, did a lot of work on Latin America and supporting them there, a lot of work with feminism, which I'm now trying to write a very substantial critique of feminism. Then, of course, the Indigenous Peoples International have formed a number of organizations. That's very important for us in the United States. The indigenous people can't remain where they are, and this casino capitalism must come to an end. And I think we should be able to monopolize and do that. And then, of course, all this Latin America, Arab and all of that. There's so much of propaganda in this country that it's very difficult to get clarity. And I suspect that we should use every available mind. And I think there's some brilliant minds here too. And I kind of guess you people are doing your bit by getting this mind.
All right.
Wonderful. I feel poor Tom is sitting there patiently, which is against Tom's culture.
It's against my nature too to sit for that long.
Yeah, it's against everyone's nature to do all this stuff. But
I thought it's a good point about Oxford giving you the confidence. It reminded me of Wizard of Oz. You don't have anything the next guy does except this piece of paper.
Right. Right.
No, but that's important.